Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a marketing and branding guru and an author from New Delhi, India, Mr. Saurabh Uboweja. Saurabh, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh. It's my privilege to be on your show.
Thank you. Saurabh is the creator of Epic Brand Map. He's the founder and managing partner of BOD Consulting, and he's an author. And all of you know I'm very partial to authors. He's an author of a book titled Building Epic Brands. So, Saurabh, before we talk about marketing and branding, tell me about your own journey. You worked across 25 countries with over 300 brand projects. What was the inspiration to choose branding as your core domain?
Ashutosh, I actually started my career as a banker
Mhm.
and not as someone who's ever going to think about getting into branding. I don't think I really chose branding as in a conscious choice of career.
Mm,
I do think branding chose me. It would
mm,
have been the other way around.
mm,
And one thing that continuously fascinated me because I've been kind of lucky to have traveled a bit, and then of course, as an observer of what's really going on, I realized that why do so many global brands succeed in India, but so few Indian brands become global? So
correct.
this curiosity just kept pulling me deeper into the world of brands.
Mm,
Earlier, I didn't know how to call it, but I started getting a vocabulary that led to the foundation of the venture called Brands of Desire way back in 2008.
mm,
And it's that work that really took me to so many wonderful clients across countries and industries, sectors. And I think I just got lucky with it. Let's just put it like that. And and therefore the lifelong obsession that how do you help Indian organizations think about becoming more simpler, more global, more clear, and more scalable. Yeah.
fascinating. Fascinating. So, since you've piqued my interest with Brands of
Okay.
Desire, tell me a
Okay.
little bit about Brands of Desire and what lessons did you learn from your transition from Brands of Desire to BOD Consulting?
Yeah. So, like uh, most of us, we often think of, branding as a bit of an afterthought. Like when you've developed your product, you know what you're going to do, you've created everything you wanted to do, and then suddenly now you start thinking about branding. I realized that it has to be flipped. It needs to be rethought completely, and branding should not be limited to what you call as sometimes design brilliance or creative brilliance. But there is a fair essence of what I call as operational genius, which is necessary. There have to be systems in an organization. There has to be a certain rhythm. And while you do need a very strong central strategic positioning, that positioning has to guide pretty much everything in your organization if you have to really shape a compelling, or as we often say, an epic brand.
Mm,
Now, the issue was that with Brands of Desire, sometimes it ended up getting perceived as a creative outfit or an agency, whereas we were always doing a little bit more strategic work. We were touching the essence of an organization. We were helping shape how products were getting developed, how operations were getting designed, and that led us to shaping BOD consulting as a more holistic umbrella for the kind of work we wanted to do.
mm,
And so that transition really kind of helped us because it helped our clients understand that brand itself is something much larger than what they perceive to be.
mhm.
And therefore, as a firm, we are also much larger or a far significant contributor to the growth than just maybe creative success.
Fascinating. Let's now talk about Epic Brand Map.
Hmm.
What does EPIC stand for, and how does it differentiate your framework from so many other brand strategy models?
Yeah. So EPIC is an acronym
Yeah.
that stands for evocative, precise, insight-driven, and clear.
Mm,
You know, Unlike a lot of traditional frameworks that kind of tend to focus branding a little bit narrowly just around and in and around marketing,
Mhm.
we wanted to treat Epic, as a almost like a brand as a business system,
Mm,
like I shared a bit earlier,
mm,
something which can align product, HR, operations, finance, culture, and not just marketing and communication.
mm,
And so the turning point for me was, the frustration that I kept seeing again and again, either brands were too complicated or they had no strategic intent, and or they were too simplified that they would just become meaningless, or just too trivial or just maybe good looking but not really well thought out.
mm,
So we felt that we needed to create one solid strategic document, which is clear, precise, also visual. If you see the shape and form of the Epic brand map, it has 19 elements which are in a triangle form,
yeah.
but there is a peak, which is the positioning, something
Mm,
which can be used to align everyone in an organization. So
mm,
that's how the Epic brand map was born, and then we added Epic later. Actually, brand map was born before it became Epic. We
yes,
felt that every element needed to be Epic, which is
absolutely.
evocative, precise, insight driven, and clear.
So, your response gives me an entry into or a segue into my next question. You spoke
Hmm.
about 19 elements of the Epic brand map.
Sure.
Which of the 19 elements do brands underestimate the most? And what, in your view, could be the cost of
Yeah.
such an oversight?
Oh, great question, Ashutosh. So, the peak of the Epic brand map is the strategic positioning. And I feel that almost every founder or brand leader or CMO that I've interacted with grossly underestimates the importance of understanding positioning. Not they don't underestimate positioning, but the deeper understanding of the subject.
Mm,
Many people perceive it as an image they want to create or a perception they want to build, but the positioning is your essence. It's
mm,
not your image. It's your true reality.
mm,
And unless and only you start from that, none of the other 18 elements will ever be super aligned. And that's something where we usually spend a lot of time,
mm.
to just get people clear about what this really means and what it
Yeah,
doesn't mean.
yeah, yeah. So you just were telling me that EPIC stands for evocative, precise, insight-driven, and clear. Can you give me an example of why you believe branding needs these four important elements?
You know, the world is very noisy,
Mm,
as we
correct.
see, you know, and therefore, if you're not evocative, if your positioning, let's say, is not evocative, or your identity is not evocative,
Mm,
that means there are no emotions rising. You wouldn't be remembered.
mm,
It's very difficult to be related to if you're not
correct.
emotionally able to trigger any response.
Mm,
Same way, if you're not precise, you're going to be very often misunderstood. One of the biggest challenges I see with brands is they're trying to be too many things, or they're trying to do too many things,
mm,
and which means you're leaving it too much to the interpretation of the your target audience to figure out what they should pick up and what they shouldn't.
mm,
And so precise is very, very crucial. Same way, if your brand is or your brand map is not shaped by deep consumer insights or really
mm,
what's happening in the market, you're going to be in your own world. You could be in your head, and
mm,
you're not going to resonate to the realities of what the market has. And finally, if you're not clear, I mean, you simply can't scale. Nobody is going to be aligned in your organization, so you have a complex definition of who you are, which maybe apparently ticks all the boxes, and but at the end of the day, you're not able to get people to work for you the way they could if you were very sharp and clear.
mm. Fascinating. And for my viewers and listeners, Saurabh, can you give me an example of an epic brand in
Yeah.
today's context?
Yeah, because there are so many amazing examples. But if I were to pick up, let's say, one Indian example, and we often think that a lot of Indian organizations or leaders do not know how to create great brands. But off late, in the last 15, 20 years, we've seen a few really good examples. I think Indigo Airlines
Mm,
is. is a brand which follows the Epic brand mapping process to the T. Now, of course,
Mm.
it's a bit of a hindsight case study for me.
Yeah.
I was not the one who influenced, just for the sake of clarity, but you know, they really anchored themselves around a positioning that was India's most hassle-free and punctual airline. Now, if you see, this is not a gimmick or a campaign or a storytelling
Mm.
idea. It is something that deeply align with every single business function, their core product, the way they service, their comms, their operations, the customer excellence approach, the trainings they do with their teams, every single action in the organization is aimed at making them a super hassle-free and a very, very punctual airline. Now,
Mm.
for me, it doesn't get more epic than that. It just basically becomes a beautiful case study in what I call as operational branding, as
Mm.
opposed to just marketing-led branding.
Mm. Fascinating. For brands struggling with
Yeah.
repositioning, how should they begin with the Epic brand map,
Well, it's
other than
it's
calling Saurabh Uboweja?
so there are a few ways, but I think uh, one has to simplify thinking about how brands are built, right? Uh, you know, and one has to also let go of the notion that you're going to build a brand with a lot of money and you need big marketing dollars and budgets and things like that. You just have to do few things really, really well. They may not be super fancy, if I may use that word. They may not even make you super differentiated to start with. You can work on differentiation later, but right now it's just about doing few things super consistently based on systems and then making people believe that you're good at it.
Mm.
And that only happens when you do them consistently.
Mm.
And from that point of view, if you think about it, branding actually becomes a lot more easier,
Mm.
and it's no longer lost into maybe the imagery aspect of it, which is
Mm.
by the way very important, but can come much later.
Mm.
You only package a really good product, right? So focus on positioning your organization as a step number one. Yeah.
Very interesting. What is your view on the future of branding in an age of AI, highly fragmented markets, and incredibly short attention spans?
Yeah, I feel that AI will change execution, or let's say it will accelerate execution, and which is amazing, brilliant actually. But it can't change the essence of how brands are created,
Mm.
and especially when you look at a flood of AI generated content systems and the way things work,
Mm.
eventually, what's really going to stand anybody more than others is going to be clarity and distinctiveness, which
Mm.
is the whole essence of Epic as well.
Mm.
And at the end of the day, the human truth at the heart of a brand will always matter more than ever.
Mm.
For example, we use AI as well in shaping, the different elements of the Epic brand map, but you cannot do that until and only you have really filled and spent a lot of time getting insights which are very real from people who are real,
Mm.
and then capturing them in worksheets or systems which become the input for AI to do any magic.
Mm.
And even post that, once you get an output, you still have to make it more evocative,
Yeah.
more sharper, more clearer. So I see AI as a brilliant assistant,
Mm.
to the whole process of shaping brands in the future.
Amazing. And are there any common branding myths that the Epic framework can debunk?
Oh, plenty of it. I think that became the whole genesis of what I ended up doing. So,
Mhm.
the primary myth is that uh, branding is just a logo or a campaign, or it's a
Mhm.
one-time
Yeah.
exercise,
Yeah.
or if you have to build a brand, you just have to create a great customer experience or exceptionally good packaging or build a brand manual. Now, all of those things are actually very important. I do
Mhm.
not want to undermine the significance of them.
Yeah.
But the order in which they have to be done, if you look at
Mm.
the Epic brand map, these are the bottom layers of the brand map. You have to first fix a structured living system, something which is going to get you very, very deep, is going to make you very consistent. It's going to make you very aligned.
Mm.
And then you have to get everybody in your organization to believe in that system.
Right.
That's when the brand starts to take shape, and then all the other things at the bottom of the brand map become so much more powerful because
Mm,
they're aimed at supporting something which is very real and not a fictitious idea.
amazing. One more question relating to the Epic brand map, and then I want to move to your book. For my viewers and listeners, Saurabh, can you share a case study where applying your framework transformed a brand?
Well, there are actually plenty. It's like choosing a child out of
I
many.
know, I know.
But I'll talk about an interesting case study of a university we were helping out with. It's a design university in Ahmedabad
Mhm,
called the Anant National University,
mhm,
and one of the challenges they were facing, in spite of doing some truly, truly incredible work, creating interdisciplinary designers who could solve much, much more complex problems than just maybe doing graphics or animation or
mhm,
product design or interiors, right? And the challenge they faced was that they did not know how to put it all together into a system that could be implemented with a lot more ease. So
mhm,
again, started with positioning. So when we did our insights work, we realized that they were out to do something truly incredible, and they were creating what you call as solutionaries. People who were solving problems, not just industry or commercial problems, but all types of problems using design. And design was at the center of the idea. So we created a positioning around creating India's first Design X university.
mhm,
And the X became a multiplier with design at the core as a mathematical equation, design X architecture, design X environment, architecture, product. So you add as many X's as you want, including
mhm,
AI,
mhm,
but you start with design as a central thinking principle. What that did for them, I mean, and then the whole map shaped out of it. What it did for them is that it suddenly made people understand what
mhm,
they were doing so well. Two, in just about 2 years' time, DesignX became a standard lingo, which we were expecting it would, but didn't expect it to be so quickly.
mhm,
The Ken featured a very detailed study on how Indian universities are going the Design X way, as opposed to just teaching it as a skill,
mhm,
versus something which is a problem-solving system. And
mhm,
so I think that's very pleasing for me personally. You don't always expect uh, results to show so quickly because when you create a brand map, it takes time to implement. And this one in particular showed results very quickly. Maybe they were already ready. They
mhm.
just needed someone to stitch together a few things. And I
Fascinating.
think a big part of the credit goes to the vice chancellor, the founders of the university, and they were very open to this kind of thinking.
Amazing. Thank you. Let's now talk about your book, Building Epic
Mhm.
Brands. And I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check out Saurabh Uboweja's book,
Thank you.
Building Epic Brands. I'll do the same. Saurabh, tell me about your book and your motivation to write it.
Ashutosh, I felt that, having worked as a consultant for so many years, I realized that I could really impact only as many clients as I could.
Mm,
Uh, Maybe 15 clients in an year, uh, do a few things here and there, and becomes 25 and 30, but
mm,
still very small numbers, right? And but the problem we were solving with what we had created as an IP
mm,
was that it required a lot of people to learn and know about. So I think I reached a point where I wanted to democratize the whole idea of how brands have to be shaped. Uh, for too long, I feel that powerful brand thinking has stayed locked up in boardrooms or, discussions where you want to be very hush hush about your core strategy and the way you think about things.
mm,
I just felt that building epic brands is a way to make a framework as powerful as Epic Brand Map more accessible to professionals, to entrepreneurs, to students,
mm.
and in the new reality of how the world looks like.
Yeah.
And I think the last time a really good book was written on brand was maybe 20 years ago,
Mm,
when the context was a lot more different. Brands were still very marketing led and not organization centered.
yeah.
So I just felt it's a good timing to make this little piece of knowledge a little bit more accessible.
Fascinating. How does the book expand or on or complement the BEB program at the Epic Brand Institute?
The book really is a handbook.
Mm,
I think it's not fair to call it a real proper non-fiction book,
mhm,
though it looks quite good, and
mhm,
I'm biased. But I think the book explains the what and why
mm,
of building epic brands. It kind of becomes like a very useful part of the toolkit that our learners who join the training get access to. Along with live exercises and tools and everything that they need to start applying the epic brand map philosophy in real projects. So the book is your hand guide. I think it should be there on every executive's table, because it's also a reference book. Sometimes you kind of disconnect with the core concept, so it's very visual. It's
mm,
full of pictures and ideas. You can just open it, have a look. Okay, I got my concept. Shut the book and get back working.
mm,
So it's that kind of a book. It's not something you read it once and put it aside.
mm. Well said. I have time for two more questions for you. Your book blends strategic clarity with actionable steps. How did you balance, or how did you strike this balance?
Simply by staying close to real world examples. Every single concept in the book has been tested in practice a few hundred times. And it's not just theory. So that kind of gives a lot of confidence to me when I talk about any concept.
Mm,
It also gives us a lot of confidence when, you know, the concepts are challenged. So at the end of the day, a thesis is as strong as its defense.
mhm,
And therefore, I feel that it's really effective because it's a practitioner's book.
mm.
It's not just theory, and each section kind of ends with a lot of actionable steps that anyone can implement.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well said. And my last question for you, Saurabh. What is the one piece of advice you would give to every brand strategist listening to our conversation?
That's a tough one. But if I were to pick any one,
Mm,
I would say don't confuse noise with strategy.
uh,
I'll say that again. Don't confuse noise with strategy,
mm,
because great brands are built on a lot of patient,
mm.
precise alignment
Right.
inside the company and outside in the market. So there
Mm.
has to be a lot more investment in depth
Yeah.
before you start amplifying and scaling up your voice.
Mm.
So that's
That's
one piece of
amazing.
advice I'd love to share.
Yep.
Yeah.
And on that note, and your incredible advice, don't confuse noise with strategy. Thank you, Saurabh, for speaking to me about your own journey. I think we went in some reasonable amount of detail and depth about branding, about strategy using the EPIC framework. I would have loved to talk about each of the 19 elements that you have in your brand map. I'm sure you've covered it in your book as well. But thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you, Ashutosh. It's my pleasure and honor to be speaking to you. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.